Call to order a Education Operations Committee meeting of the Wausau Board of Education. The first item, actually second item on the agenda tonight, I will seek a motion to approve the minutes of March 22nd, 2021.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. All right. Third item on the agenda is public and student comment. And it looks like we do have one. Mr. Corey Sillers has asked to speak tonight. And Mr. Sillers, I know you've been here before. Just a reminder, there'll be 3 minutes, and keep your eye on Ms. Peck, and she will keep you well informed of where you're at with the time.
Very good.
So, thank you.
Again, name is Corey Sillers, live at 223565 County Road KK, Town of Red Mountain. Have 8th grader at John Muir, 11th grader at Wausau West. I come tonight to offer encouragement to the families of our school district that have been involved since last September and ask them to stay involved and keep their voices heard for the sake of our children. It is their voices that have made the changes that have taken place in April, and it will be your voices that continue to make the changes into the future and for our next school district, the next school year. Second, I offer my prayers and support to this year's board members as you work on our district's issues towards fully reopening our schools and allowing our children to be children. They need all of our love and support to heal after this uncertain year of learning for them. This community decided to pass question number 1 of the referendum, and now they will be able to have extra support staff. Probably not instantaneously, of course. It takes time to hire these other professionals. I had wished at the Wausau West meeting, getting to talk to Dr. Hiltz and Bob Tess and Angie about some questions at that time. A little more transparency on a few issues. I'm a detail-oriented person, and I like to solve problems as well. So I had to go and do a little digging with some other staff members that trust me and understand who I am and that I have worked with in the past to gain a little more knowledge on those questions. After those discussions, unfortunately, I'd like to say, I think you're a little further away than 74 votes on question 2. I kind of was making a joke to a few people, the district, because I analyzed everything you had available on the website, listened to all the videos that the principals had done. You put everything that probably has been an issue in one way or the other for the district for, say, the past 10 years in general, plus the kitchen sink was my joke. You put everything plus the kitchen sink on your list. So I think there needs to be a little bit more discussion and a little more revision to maybe get the public to go along with that. Also, I do not support the current mask policy of the district. Students have been proven not to be a significant cause of spreading the COVID-19 and should be allowed to be children and active students, and especially in outdoor situations. Very good. Thank you.
Okay, that was it for public and student comment. So moving on to the next item, we have the legal expense summary for 3rd quarter. Bob Tess will be presenting a summary report of our legal expenses from 3rd quarter 2020-2021.
Thank you. This is not for action. You'll see this 4 times throughout the year, a quarterly report each quarter of where we spend our legal budget. And the summary is also up on the screen, although the numbers aren't super legible. We're in the midst of a pretty good year. I should knock on wood, I guess. We're 3/4 of the way through the year with $24,000 in legal expenses, and the typical average at the 3/4 pole is usually around $40,000 or $50,000. So, so far so good. Again, no action needed. It's broken down by category and by law firm. And one thing that we do take action on every summer is we ask the board to authorize the law firms that we work with for a variety of reasons. So all the law firms up here are part of that approved list. So this summer you'll get a chance to look at that list, and we use different law firms for different reasons. They specialize in certain things, so that's the reason for so many law firms. Are there any questions on this report? Because it is not for action.
Doesn't look like it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll stay up here for the...
You. All right. As Dr. Hiltz just mentioned, we're going to offer a friendly amendment to the agenda, and we're going to pull forward the item on summer learning program that Dr. Phelps and Ms. Heilman will be sharing a brief presentation on the upcoming summer program for 2021.
Thank you for having us tonight. We'll make this quick. What we want to do, I'm Rob Phelps, principal at Horace Mann Middle School, and I'm joined by Deb Heilman, principal at South Mountain Elementary. We're also our coordinators for our summer learning program. So we're going to quickly highlight some things, short about last summer, and then really talking about what we offer for our families and our students during this upcoming summer. So last summer, quick, we made it. As you know, shutdown happened at about March, and we quickly switched to virtual learning for summer. We want to thank all of our stakeholders, especially our teaching staff, for stepping up and being able to offer similar programs that we have in other summers that we did last summer. So thank you also to our district administrators for working with us. This summer, let's talk about this summer. So our highlights overall, we determined early on through a parent survey that we did want our programs to be in person. We do have some limited virtual options for our family, but the majority of our programs are going to be in person this summer. We do have some additions this summer due to the pandemic and some additional learning that we have opportunities to give our families. So we're going to talk a little bit tonight about additional programming in the afternoon. And then also we added additional busing in the afternoon. In the past, we've had busing in the morning, and then about that noontime, now we have busing at that 3:30 mark. All right, so overall in our programs, we have morning programs, we have afternoon programs. The highlights that we have throughout all of these programs are listed up here in color. Engaging activities, we like to get outside during the summer as much as possible. We have busing at the end of our day and middle of the day to our sports camps. And then also we bus our kids from all of our district sites to the Boys and Girls Club to give them that option as well. We have a 6-week program. We go Monday through Thursday, and then we have a seventh week option for many of our students. We have a no-cost breakfast and lunch, and we have transportation in the morning, like I said, from all of our sites to our locations. Our teaching staff and support staff, they are awesome. Year after year, they step up. We worried about a burnout rate this year, but we're happy to report that the majority of our teaching staff and support staff come from the Wausau School District. Let's dive quickly into the elementary program.
Good evening. I would like to join Rob in thanking you all for the chance to share a little bit about summer. Our elementary program, as Rob mentioned, begins with 6 core weeks. And this year we're really changing our focus to help support the transition to the next grade level. So we know that all of our students can benefit from some additional learning. So we have looked at our math and literacy instruction, worked very closely with our literacy and math coaches, and that will become a core part of our morning. In addition to that, we have been working closely with Angie and Julie to work on some Leader and Me morning meeting activities during the day to welcome all of our kids to our day. We're going to continue some thematic activities, outdoor activities. We are excited. We do have some opportunities to partner with our community organizations, depending on their ability this year to support and mitigate around COVID, but that is something we look forward to. We will continue our 5th to 6th grade school forest transition program. I think tonight you hear a little bit more from the school forest, but they have a great program out there to prepare our students to transition up to 6th grade at both of our middle schools. Our week 7 is our attempt to give one more opportunity for students to engage. So we have something called saunters and stretchers, as well as world cultures. Students go out and hike the Ice Age Trail. In the past, we've been able to partner with the Y. This year, due to capacity limits, they're not able to join us in that partnership, but we're returning back out to the school forest instead, and then we'll also offer a world cultures opportunity for students. Enrollment's looking great. If you're out there listening, go on the Wausau School District site. We have over 700 students right now at elementary registered, so we think we're going to be very close to our 2019 enrollment again.
All right, our middle school program, very exciting. Each year we offer a whole bunch of different classes. This year over 20 classes, and then along with our engaged learning, which that's where we focus on our math and literacy skills. Some of our new classes include anime, Hmong language and culture class. We also have some exciting ones I like to highlight for all of those parents at home listening: 5K training, kindness class, robotics academy, which also has some high school components and some high school students as well. Also this year, in collaboration with UW Oshkosh, we are offering a 2-week afternoon intervention course for certain 6th to 8th graders that we're identifying. We have our powerlifting class for the east side and west side kids. We have a freshman transition for our 8th graders moving to 9th grade. And again, for many summers in a row, we have had a wilderness connections along with the Wausau Police Department. It's where our guidance counselor takes a small group of students out into the wilderness for a 2-night stay and canoeing trip. Our school resource officer also attends that. Our high school program, very similar to years past, is our main focus is our credit recovery in high school. And this year we do have more students already signed up than in previous years. Also in the high school, we do have other programs. We do collaborate with our alternative high school at NTC. We have our lifting program, which is out on our website as well. We work with EAA, has their summer learning program. We have an art enrichment class, which we started 2 years ago, and there's a couple pictures, amazing pictures shown. And then, like I mentioned before, we have the robotics academy.
So we've talked a lot about what happens in the morning. Some wonderful things we've built into the afternoon. We're excited to give students full day programming again this year. So we will partner with Community Connections and our G2M coordinator to provide afternoon activities at our 5 elementary schools. And in addition to that, we have started some academy enrichment programs. Students get on a bus from their morning site and head over to Horace Mann, where they can engage in STEM, music, art, world languages, some great enrichment opportunities. This year, we're very excited to be able to also offer some additional intervention opportunities. So we're really looking forward to helping students fill in some of those gaps that may have started and happened over the past year and a half. So we'll be having some focus on our English learners, our special education students, and then just students that need additional support in literacy and math. They'll have that opportunity again in the afternoon, and when they're all done with their day, they'll get bused back to their homeschool sites. The final thing we just wanted to conclude with today, because we're just giving you a quick snapshot into summer. Rob and I could probably talk for hours about our passion for the programs. But a couple of years ago, we formed a really strong partnership with the National Vision for Summer Learning. And through that partnership, we've really grounded ourselves in the 5 core principles you'll see behind you. That's really what we ground ourselves in when we make our decisions and when we think about improving our programs. So hopefully today we gave you a little view into one of each of those topics, and we'd be happy if you have any questions to answer anything you might want to know about summer.
All right. Anyone have questions for either?
Yeah,
I
have
just
a
had.
question.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ka.
Thank you. I'm interested about the Hmong language and culture class. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Either one of us can. So there's a couple different opportunities. So there is a partnership that we have with DC Everest. It's a program called Camp Friends, which is really a program for all students, kindergarten through 12th grade. And then we also offer some Hmong language and culture classes through our week 7, which is more of a world culture piece, and partners with looking at a variety of different cultures.
Okay. And the anime class, that's separate from the Hmong language and culture class, right? I'm
That
just
is
reading
separate.
that,
Yes,
yeah, like together, but it's separate.
separate.
Okay, thank you.
Just one question from me, I guess probably for both of you. I know historically we had done targeted recruitment for those kids that we thought would benefit from an average summer school, if you will. Coming off the year and a half that we have we done more aggressive targeted recruitment? How is that part coming along? I mean, obviously the gaps are bigger now for some kids, and anything we're doing there?
Yep, absolutely. So I can talk a little bit about elementary. Hopefully everybody has received a couple of just mass communications, but now what we do is we pull the names of all the students enrolled from the elementary schools and share them with their home school. And then we ask teachers to directly look at who's on that list and reach out to their families. They've been using Seesaw, they've been using personal phone calls and emails to really try and make sure we're getting the right kids. The other thing is we have a platform called EduClimber in our district where it's a database of student assessments, and we are working with our literacy and math coordinators, and they're pulling data from there to see which of our students are struggling the most right now. And those are the students we'll actually target for our afternoon. Our afternoon interventions right now are by invitation only. So we'll be calling those families. We offer interventions in the morning as well, just through our core program, but that's going to be a really structured, deep immersion for some of our kids who really need it.
And very similar at the secondary level. We started those conversations in November and December about our recovery plan from the pandemic. So our site coordinators have been working very, very closely with our counseling staff at East, West, and and our middle schools very closely, signing up kids as early as January once the first semester ended, and starting to have those conversations. And we'll learn more about the recovery plan overall and how summer learning kind of fits into that recovery plan a little bit later tonight.
Okay, good. I mean, obviously we didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight, but the earlier we get these kids on track, obviously the better. So that's great. Thank you.
Right, and one thing I don't think Rob jumped in, but I just have to share, our district team and leadership has been phenomenal in supporting what Rob and I are trying to do with summer. We couldn't do it without all of those departments. We're excited about growing the afternoon, but as you grow, you need more people to help that grow. So our literacy and math coaches have been great and enthusiastic about jumping in to help us to support more kids too. So they've been
I've
wonderful.
got a question pertaining to EduClimber. That's really a great platform for elementary and middle school. What are you going to be using for high school?
High school also uses EduClimber.
Does the high school use the EduClimber
Yes,
as well?
they do.
Okay. And what type of interventions are you using for the students that have been in AP programs, IB programs, getting them back on track? Not just, it's just not credit recovery, but it's also our high-end students. What are we doing for them?
At the middle school level, which that's what I do every single day, we're trying to invite we have programming for all of our kids. That's where, our anime, and I highlighted some of those, but there's 20 plus enrichment activities for our kids as well. We've been in conversation with our high school principals about that recovery plan for all, and I know, again, we're going to hear more about that plan with night school and after school study zones that we've been doing as a district as well.
I'll be interested in hearing what we're doing at the high school level as well. Thank you.
Were you going to say something?
I just wanted to add, for the benefit of the board and for any families listening, Wausau has really a nationally recognized summer school program. Dr. Phelps and Mrs. Heilman have been invited to speak on numerous occasions across the country. So just want to let you all know, and again, thank you both for all your work and everybody who's worked with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Mr. Tess, our 2021-2022 budget reconciliation plan.
Thank you. This is an action item. At the end of the slideshow, we will ask you to take action. And before we get into the budget reconciliation discussion itself, I want to back up a little bit and speak more globally about the budget and about budgets in school districts. In a school district, the budget goes from July 1st to June 30th. So we're talking about the next school year budget. State biennial budgets also start in July and end in June, but they go for 2 years. So the challenges that we experience for school budgets ebb and flow, and they get kind of more challenging one year, then a little bit less challenging the next year. And I don't mean more challenging and less challenging with the amount of money, but more and less in terms of what we know and how certain we are. So we'll spend 1 year not being very certain what's going to happen, and then we'll spend the next year with a larger degree of certainty. Right now, we're in one of those uncertain years because the state is still discussing the budget. There's some hearings going on around the state. The governor has proposed his budget, but with a split legislature and the state house, probably not going to be settled for quite a while, maybe into the summer. So this is the start of that budget discussion. And we could probably even back up one step. We'll finalize the 21-22 budget right around the end of October, October 30th. And almost immediately in November, we start building a model, a projection model that uses all the assumptions that we use as a baseline. And we work on that from November and December and January, February. We gather budget requests from administrators and principals, and they come from teachers and buildings and ground staff through administrators. So we're doing all of that until this point. And then at this point, we present to you what we call a reconciliation plan. And it takes the budget baseline model with all the assumptions, all the requests, the best guess on what's coming out of Madison, and we try to reconcile it in time to present you with a budget that gets passed by the time July 1 comes around. Now, if you back up, June board meeting, we bring things to you in the May Ed Ops meeting for consideration. So this is our last Ed Ops meeting before we show you a budget. But it's far from being the final budget, because then we continue to talk about that budget throughout the annual meeting, and then a couple of more times before you get the final say in October. And then we set the levy and we establish the budget for the next year, and then we do it all again. So this year we do have some challenges. Probably the most unusual budget cycle I've seen in a while with the things that are going on right now and the uncertainties. The outcome of the referendum is a challenge because we only recently learned the fate of that referendum. So we had a spending plan, but we're getting a little bit more concise with it, but we really only recently learned about that a little while ago. The state biennial budget will not be decided until this summer. That's a challenge that we're going to have to get beyond. How many students return to the district will also be unknown for a little while. Now, fortunately, the number of students will affect staffing and fluctuate quite a bit on the expense side, but it doesn't matter as much on the revenue side. We're protected on the revenue side from fluctuations in enrollment, somewhat. But we still have to staff it. And the staffing plan on the expense side has very much to do with how many of these students return or what our enrollment looks like. We won't know that for sure until next August, maybe even September. So it's a challenge we've got to get beyond. Staffing levels have to be established now. People need to know if they have jobs next year. We have to establish our staffing plan. There is still going to be some turnover. Some things happen actually throughout the summer, but we have to establish our staffing plan now in spite of that uncertainty with the number of students. Esser 2 funding, now we're talking about federal relief dollars in large amounts, and we don't say much about Esser 1 because Esser 1 money is being spent this year. We will clear out Esser 1, but we'll talk a lot about Esser 2 and Esser 3. And there's a little bit of a challenge there because Esser 2 funding is for a limited time. It has to be spent by October 24, 2024. And it needs to include a combination of alternative funding sources or a discontinuation of the expenses because the money stops. So once the money stops, we either have to buy to the expense or we have to find an alternative method for continuing the funding, right? That's a challenge that we're going to have to work beyond, but we don't have to address it immediately because we have these funds for a few years. The same holds true for Esser 3 funding, okay? Not yet determined. We haven't gotten the official allocation yet, but it's pretty clear what it is. But we're going to have to work with those same challenges as Esser 1 and Esser 2. Probably going to repeat it a few times. It's non-recurring money, and we use non-recurring money for recurring costs. Presents a problem that we've got to get beyond. Next slide, please. With the challenges, there are some opportunities. That's always refreshing. Okay, the recently successful question 1 of the referendum, $4 million in operational revenue every single year, forever, will allow us to add some much needed pupil services staff. And we're starting to work on that already. We're trying to hire as many of these pupil services staff as we can before next year. Successful referendum question 1 also offers opportunities to fund some of those other budget requests that otherwise would have been impossible to fund. The Esser, the Pandemic Federal Relief Funds, may be used to fund some of these budget requests as well. In a typical year, you're going to see later on, if we get $2 million in funding requests through all of the requests that come in January and February and March, we would have to make room for it in our budget by reducing $2 million in other expenses. Esser provides an opportunity to fund many of those requests without getting rid of other things in our budget. Now, of course, it comes along with, you also need a plan for saying goodbye to the money once it disappears. But that provides an opportunity. And then this last one, I still think the state biennial budget that we see approved during the summer is going to be better than the one we're assuming right now. In our assumptions that were presented back in December, we assumed flat revenue. The governor's budget is far from flat revenue, but we know that's not going to happen. But we are hoping that something better than what we're assuming will happen. So that's also an opportunity. And I'm listening to both sides of the aisle, and there's a lot of hope in what both of them are saying. So I think that state budget's going to be better than the one that we assumed. Next slide, please. There's some logistical challenges going forward building a budget with so much uncertainty. How do we build in enough flexibility considering so many large elements are unknown? Especially the state budget and state funding represents about 2/3 of our revenue, but more like 90% of our spending authority. It's the revenue limit. Some of it comes local, some of it comes from the state, but about 90% of our spending authority is decided through that biennial budget process, which we may not know for a little while. Another logistical challenge, developing accurate yet flexible enrollment projections to use for a district-wide staffing plan. A little bit more worried about the expense side when we're hiring teachers and staffing our buildings adequately. I'm not as worried about the revenue side because we are offered some protection against fluctuations in enrollment. Maintaining as much flexibility in staffing while establishing next year's workforce, that kind of was captured in a previous bullet. Wise use of federal pandemic relief funds while being mindful of the long-term planning challenges that come with non-recurring nature of these funds. Probably said it 3 times, I'll maybe say it another 3 times. We have to be careful in using one-time money for recurring costs. And then last, accurately projecting some of these macro revenue elements that are yet to be determined by the state. Is there going to be an increase in revenue limit per student? I've heard 0, I've heard $200. Who knows what's going to happen? Per pupil revenue limit increases. The per pupil spending, and there's been a trend out of Madison recently to not put money on the revenue limit, but put it on per pupil categorical aid. Will that increase? Special ed aid percent. Right now it's at about 30. We've heard going up to maybe 40% or 15% or 50%. That could be millions of dollars in additional aid. Student count flexibility. There's talk that you can use the higher of last year or 2 years ago. So if you went down in enrollment last year, like almost all schools did, you'd be further protected from that. So these have yet to be decided, so those are also challenges. Next slide, please. The current version of the reconciliation plan that you're going to see in a little while, and I'm going to ask you to vote on, builds in a staffing plan that was initially established and includes some additional staffing in some high-need areas. For example, our secondary schools did not see as much decline in enrollment, and we're anticipating some increases in enrollment in secondary. The staffing plan addresses that. Additional referendum revenue limit authority, of course, will be spent on pupil services staff. But when we went out to the community and told everybody what the question was about, we also talked about some capital replacement and some equipment replacement and using it to increase safety and security in certain ways. And especially considering the other referendum question failed, there's certainly a lot of pressure on that $4 million to spend on all kinds of things. The high degree of uncertainty in regards to the state budget is combined with the certainty of newly authorized revenue limit capacity, the $4 million in question one, and the federal money. So yes, we have uncertainty in the state budget, but we have certainty in $4 million that the voters told us we could spend on very specific things, and we have $16.5 million in Esser funds. Not all in one year, but over the next several years, that also is pretty certain. So we're going to leverage the certainty to offset the uncertainty in the state budget. And of course, as always, we have an eye on immediate resource allocation, but a long-term strategic lens. We don't want to paint ourselves into a corner 3 or 4 years down the road. This is the first page of the budget reconciliation plan, and if you're looking on your own screen, you might be able to read it even easier. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the layout. The date is when I put it in board book. This target, negative $1.6 million, is after we build the budget projection, and we use all the assumptions to find the revenue and the expense. We are off by $1.6 million. We have to cut or reduce $1.6 million to have a balanced budget. So to start with, in the running commentary, after we save $200,000 on reducing gas, electric, and water, mostly because the rates are going down, plus we're making energy efficiency improvements, even after you do that, running total of all the reductions, we still have to reduce, in the running commentary, must reduce an additional $1.4 million. So that's how to read this chart, right? The next one, reduce contracted services. They're currently not being used, but they are in the budget. Remove them, $82,000. This one might get some attention. Change all employee salary wage increase assumptions. When I calculated the assumption to be put in the model, it was 2.5%. We didn't change the teacher compensation model. We didn't do anything with it. But the teachers, by getting master's degrees or getting national board certification, or when they transition to the new model or don't transition to the new model, kind of set that number for the next couple of years. If we take all the teachers into consideration and we move them to where they moved according to the plan we shared 2 years ago, it ended up being closer to 2.10%. And if the teachers are going to get 2.10%, just an assumption that we're making, and the board has authority to do this, I'm assuming everybody else is at 2.1 also. So from dropping it from 2.5 to 2.1, with the consumer price index still at 1.23%, so still considerably above the consumer price index, that saved $250,000 of the budget. You're going to see some reductions, reduce reduce 5 elementary staff. That's the dollar amount. There will be some additions below. So it's not just a reduction in staff. 0 support staff at the elementary level. 8 at the middle school level. Repurposed below, you're going to see it as an addition. So if we take all these reductions, we still have to reduce an additional $13,000. That's how that works. Now we start considering some of the requests that were made in December, January, and February. Club Connections Partnership, academic and SEL support at the middle school is $21,000. It's a pretty small cost. School counselor department chairs at all the elementary schools, $4,380. Create a softball program at John Muir, pretty minimal cost, $5,000. Assistant girls swim coach at East for the JV team, $3,500. You get the picture. They're all pretty adequately described. We could talk about more of them in detail. Reduced $741,000. If you go to the next slide, starts out with $741,000 and it ends because we get $4 million in revenue from question number 1, but we spend exactly $4 million on question number 1. So that reduction of $741,000 didn't change any. We're essentially saying the voters said to use $4 million, this is what we're spending on it. We're right back where we were. And they're the categories, and I'm going to show you a little slide later. It's the next one, I think. The referendum, $4 million. Pupil services staff, $1.9 million. Short-term assets in tech and B&G, $750,000 each. Alt-high expenses that are going up and up and up, those could be considered pupil services-ish, $100,000. Referendum-funded equipment replacement. We're trying to focus on stuff kids touch, equipment that kids touch that needs to be replaced because we just don't have it in the budget, $300,000. The Raptor Visitor Management Program, $12,000. Support for underfunded budgets. We're going to identify several budgets that just have been historically underfunded, and that's $188,000. Next slide. This is a picture of that. And I shared this a couple of weeks ago. When we get $4 million of additional revenue limit authority, and we know the pupil services staff can't all be hired instantaneously, we know that that blue, which represents personnel, in particular pupil services, is going to go up, 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 up. The cost of the personnel is going to go up. Our ability to hire people is going to go up. If we do eventually pass a successful referendum, we're going to have space for them to work. So we know that pupil services staffing cost is going to go up, up, up. The $4 million isn't going to go up, up, up. So we have to find something else that goes down, 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 down. So early on in that program, 21, 22, this classroom equipment, technology, and B&G replacement starts out to be a pretty big chunk. We start to replace, for example, classroom displays. Some of the monitors that you see in classrooms are in big time need of replacement. We maybe start with that. We pick a couple other buildings and grounds components that wouldn't be funded with 20-year debt through another bond referendum, but are going to be funded here. Maybe the scrubbers for the floors and some other equipment that needs to be purchased. We make a purchase, the next year that dollar amount goes down, the next year it goes down again until it goes down to about $225,000 and stays there to support a continuous replacement cycle in those departments. And by then, the pupil services dollar gets up, 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 up. You will also see a little bit of a bend right here. In 24, 25, it goes up a little more steeply. And that's part of the strategy to replace the funding that came with the Esser program. The federal relief money runs out in October of 24. And we've got a dual strategy of getting rid of some things and continuing to fund some things with non-Esser money. We have some money built in to do that. Okay? Next slide. The next slide, again, that number you're going to recognize, 741, and it ends with 741. So this one represents Esser-funded requests. These requests came in throughout the winter, and they are almost perfectly aligned with the intent of Esser. Esser is the federal relief money, and it's to be used for pandemic recovery, pandemic preparedness, and certainly recovery from learning loss. With Esser 3, there's actually a 20% requirement. You have to use it for learning loss recovery. So all of these requests qualify for use of Esser funds. And I've got $4,016,871, and all of these add up to that same exact number. So you're right back to $741,000 in reductions. The 2 million down here obviously can change. One nice thing about Esser money is it doesn't have to be spent in any one given year. You spend whatever your plan is and you carry over to the next year. Next slide. These are just the dollar amounts, $16.5 million. Esser 1 will be used already at the end of this year. We will probably use some of Esser 2 this year, and then we'll spread out Esser 2 and Esser 3 until October of 2024. The next slide shows a great visual. That's the profile of spending. And if this money is in for pandemic recovery, pandemic relief, learning loss, it stands to reason that you should probably be spending quite a bit of it up front at the beginning of that period. So we spend quite a bit in all the different categories up front. This is the current year when we're spending Esser 1 money. A big chunk of Esser 2 is planned to be spent in 21-22. It goes down a little bit, it goes down. We want that tapered profile, because at the end of the performance period for the grant, we need to wean ourselves of that spending. So it needs to go down to nothing. So that profile will obviously change. We don't want to exactly commit to what we're going to do with Esser money in 2024, right? But that's the intended profile. Next slide. So there's that recognizable 741,000 number, and it changes a little bit because what happens if we get a more favorable state budget? Let's say by $2 million. So at the end of the summer, we look at the state budget and we just had $2 million more revenue to spend. What's going to happen? It could easily relieve some of that Esser pressure. Esser money, we could use budget money and then it would have a permanent home in the budget instead of having to be discontinued in 3.5 years. So we could do that. We could reduce fewer staff. There's some things that we certainly could do with the $2 million, and we could actually come closer to an actual balanced budget. We're not used to being off by $750,000 this time of year. This time of year, we usually try to bring something to you that's balanced. Last year, we departed because circumstances were a little bit unusual. This year, we're continuing that departure because circumstances are a little bit unusual. Who knows? To carry through to the actual budget, but right now it's out of balance by $750,000. So any favorable state budget could offset that and make it closer to balance. It could also take some of these Esser funds and give them a home in our regular budget, which would have permanent funding. We can go back to any one of these slides. I believe that's the last one that I have. My prepared remarks, at least, there would be the recommended motion to pass it as presented, and this is just the reconciliation plan, but it certainly informs our next step, which is building the budget. So with that, anything to either add or questions from anyone?
I have a question. As my usual pitch every year is that I would like to see all our employees being paid a living wage, because we tell them that we love them and that they do a great job for us, but actions speak louder than words, and our employees should be able to live a comfortable life without worrying about which bill they're not going to pay this month.
Bob, just a question. It's a hypothetical on your part, but you're hearing on both sides of the aisle down in Madison. You got the House, you got the Senate, not really talking much with the governor right now. They're kind of at odds, and the communication has, based on what I had heard at the last board meeting for the Wisconsin Association of School Boards, it's not happening. And so my question is to you, being an optimist, when's the earliest do you think we can see the state funding, let it be increase of 0 to 200 per student, and what's your most pessimistic?
The most pessimistic would be flat revenue, and that's what we have built right now. Yeah. So in the most pessimistic perspective for me, we'd be dealing with the budget reconciliation plan as presented. If it got worse than that, we'd have an opportunity to maybe bring a couple of more Esser funded items in to replace, theory is spend somebody else's money instead of spend your own money, so to speak, federal money instead of our own money. if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
So we could do that. We could maybe ask you to pass a deficit budget that's a greater than a $750,000 deficit budget. We could do that. There are some things we could do. But optimistically, I'm not going to go all the way to the governor's budget. The governor's budget would probably give us another $5 million in spending, right? But based only on the revenue that's available at the state level, I think both sides of the aisle will pass something that's better than what I originally presented back in December when I made the assumptions. The revenue, statewide revenue picture has gotten better since then. And I think that statewide revenue picture is going to lead to something that they agree on that's better than what we've been assuming.
Okay, good.
Other questions?
I have one question just about the reduction in the FTEs at the elementary level and the middle school level. How was that determined? Is that based on enrollment changes, and without knowing what our enrollment is for, several more months, how do we determine those numbers?
Yes, it is all based on enrollment, and at each school, they're able to take their current second graders, roll them up to third graders, take the kindergartners, roll them up to first graders, and they did their best at determining what their needed staffing is going to be for enrollment next year, so it is based off of enrollment at the elementary. Now, one thing I didn't share, I believe this reconciliation plan is an addition in staff of about 10 FTE. So it's adding 10 FTE in high need areas. So we do call out the subtractions, and then later on, I didn't call out the additions, but there are also additions.
Okay.
Bob. Also at the secondary level, course requests kind of drive some of that staffing as well. And just so the board is aware, as we have talked, Bob and his team have done a great job. We've talked about this for months. Kind of two driving parameters here. One, as Bob's already shared real clearly, trying to be flexible to some of the uncertainties. But really driving this is making sure we're investing in students, right? That accelerated learning recovery, and anything we can do to help them succeed. That's really where we're trying to make sure we invest these funds.
Also, with the students, with the enrollment uncertainty, it's not quite as big of an impact as the numbers would suggest, because, for example, you could have 50 elementary students come back, 50 more than we thought. But that doesn't mean 2 more teachers, because they don't come back to the same school. We got 13 schools with how many sections. It might not mean anything. Where it gets tricky is when several come back to one section and it puts us over the limit, and then it tips you into maybe having to hire an additional staff member, because we got, now we have 35 kindergartners, and we don't want 35 kindergartners in one classroom. But generally it's spread out, so it's not like it's suddenly going to be, 10 new staff members.
Exact. Unfortunately, that works in both directions.
Right.
When you add students, you don't necessarily have to add staff, and when you lose students, you don't usually have efficiencies that you can capture by relieving staff. You lose one here, you can lose 100 pretty easily without affecting your staffing plan. So it works in both directions, but you're correct.
I may have missed this, Bob, but we're held harmless for a year or 2 years?
Well, you're held harmless in 2 different regards. You get kind of held harmless on the declining enrollment, so your enrollment is assumed to stay flat, and then you're held harmless on the dollar amount too. And you get these 2 protections against declining enrollment. And it's really important when there's 0 revenue limit change, because you need that hold harmless on the dollar amount, and when you're in declining enrollment, you need the hold harmless there. So you actually get $2 amounts that protect you in slightly different ways. So, but you're held harmless for a year. And then the second year, it gets wrapped into that 3-year rolling average, and that's when you really start paying the price. And that's not unknown for us. We knew about that because it's last year's number. So as bad as that is, you don't have to travel with that as an unknown anymore because it's set. And it works both ways there too. So if we spiked in enrollment this year and everybody starts counting the dollars that are coming in, there are protections that go in both directions. right? So you don't benefit from that spike in enrollment right away because it has to weed through this 3-year rolling average, and it takes away from this protection you've got first before it starts counting in a positive manner. It's pretty complicated, but the increases and decreases, we're kind of protected on one end, but we don't benefit from it on the other end.
You know, and the other thing too is that we always talk about, you know, being on the wrong end of that in and out, you know, type of a scenario. Obviously, we're on the wrong end of it last year, but I mean, imagine a situation where it's reversed and we have an increase in enrollment. And I still believe that if we're doing all the things that we're capable of doing and marketing ourselves the way that we should be marketing ourselves and making parents aware of all the different things that we offer, we should be a district of choice, and we should see increasing enrollment. So then we don't have to have the discussions about, well, declining enrollment exemptions and all this. We should worry about where we're going to house all the kids, right?
You're
and
right.
it makes some of the referendum discussions a little bit more palatable too.
You're exactly right. And the one thing we have going for us with the declining enrollment we're experiencing right now is it is a statewide thing. It's statewide and in declining enrollment, so that offers me more hope that the state will offer a solution, because a lot of school districts are in that jam. But you're right, to become an increasing enrollment district, you first of all have to dig out. You have to get rid of the declining enrollment exemption before you can really benefit from increasing enrollment. And I hope we're not that far away from it. I don't think we are. We're close.
Okay.
Thank
No
you.
other questions? I will be seeking a motion to recommend to the full board the 2021-2022 budget reconciliation plan as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Do we have a first? Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Jim. All right, any other questions? No? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you, Bob. Right, next on the agenda, Dr. Young and Ms. Channel will be sharing about contract renewals, EEA, and Montessori for our charter schools.
Good evening. Thank you for having us present tonight. My name is Shannon Young. I'm the principal at EEA Learning Academy, and this is Elizabeth Channel.
And I'm the head of school at our Montessori charter.
So we're going to share a little bit of information with you tonight about the 2 charter schools and about the charter school contract renewal process. Ironically, both Montessori and the original school that began EEA Learning Academy, which stands for Enrich, Excel, Achieve Learning Academy. Montessori began with 1st through 5th grade in 2005. In 2007, they added a 6th grade, and in 2011, they added kindergarten. In that same year, 2005, that was the year that New Horizons Charter School began. It was a 7th and 8th grade school. Parents and grandparents came to the board and asked that it expand. And so there was one year that it was a 7, 8, 9 school. And then in 2007, EEA Learning Academy, the high school counterpart, was added. The 2 schools were relocated to be within Wausau East. And when the next contract renewals came up in 2011, the schools merged together and adopted the name EEA Learning Academy because we had already had graduates from EEA, and so chose to abandon the New Horizons name and just stick with EEA Learning Academy at that time. So we've been through some subsequent charter contract renewals over the years. For both of us, these are the school's 16th year in operation. So I think in some ways still sometimes not as widely known resources in the district as we would hope, but definitely I think we both have a long-standing history in the district of providing services to district students. So as we embarked on our renewal process this year, we found out that there were some new DPI requirements that were put in place. One of those being that charter school governance boards now need to be incorporated. It's always been part of the process that each school has an independent governance board, and that governance board creates a contract with you to provide services. It's essentially a trade of autonomy for accountability, saying that let us do these things differently, and this is what we will deliver for the district. So we both have governance boards in place, our governance councils, and we have worked with them collaboratively to begin this charter school renewal process. It was through that process we found out they both needed to incorporate, and so those processes were begun. Wisconsin now has an entity called the Wisconsin Resource Center for Charter Schools, and that has been an immense help to us in that process, as they will help guide schools through, they got us in touch with the right attorney who would help draw up the articles of incorporation for both of the schools. In addition, there is now a DPI benchmark checklist process for all contract renewals. What all of this means, and as we, that process started, that was put in place in between our last renewal and this renewal now, those requirements. So now in preparation for the new renewal, as we worked collaboratively, we found out some of the things that we needed to change in terms of updating our contracts. And essentially what's happened is, as we've gotten to this evening in presenting our contracts to you, you can be assured that they have been checked and double checked, and the DPI checklist, if you ever want to look it up or if you'd like to see a copy of it, certainly let one of us know, but it is quite a lengthy process of just making sure that all the right things are in the contracts, all of the protections for students, and just various facets of that governing contract, that it's all in place. All the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed, and now we both have contracts to present to you this evening. Elizabeth is going to share a little bit about Montessori, and then I'll share a little more about EEA specifically.
Thank you, Shannon. So I wanted to start with Habit 4, and in the Covey and the Leader in Me that we are doing as a whole school district, you think win-win. Our whole entire priority in our school district is to serve our children, and having our charter schools gives parents and families and children another opportunity to meet their needs. So we're always thinking of how we can be cooperative, how can we offer what is best for all of the children that we need to serve. So I just wanted to start with that. I wanted to go on and share a little bit about Montessori for those of you that have not had a chance to hear me speak in front of the board. So I want to start with some of the things that we celebrate. We celebrate large class sizes. And I know that is not something that a lot of people think like, oh my gosh, why would you celebrate that? But in Montessori, it's a great thing. Our class sizes should be 28 to 35. Our sweet spot is 30. If we can get in our multi-age classrooms 10 of each grade level, it really provides children an opportunity to learn from each other, collaborate with each other, provides leadership opportunities for our children. So in our school, for example, our children's house just has kindergarten. Elementary 1 is first, second, and third grade blended together. And then our elementary 2 classrooms are fourth, fifth, and sixth grade blended together. So we look for those larger class sizes to really encourage that community feel. Experiential learning allows children to learn about themselves as they're learning. We do a lot of conferences with our students. We talk to them, we figure out what they like to do, and try to incorporate that into everything that we do. Practical life experiences in our school teach our children how to really build those real life skills. So we are looking at cooking, baking, cleaning. You'll see some of our children in Children's House that do those cleaning activities as part of their school day. And that practical life really builds that concentration and establishes order for that child so that they understand that they have that responsibility for their own learning. And we really focus on nature and our community and helping children understand their importance in our world. I think in this time, like all times, but especially now, just having children to understand that they are an important part of this world and everybody has a purpose is really important. Some of our children and families enjoy our multi-age classrooms that I just referenced. we are able to differentiate follow-up work. So if we have children that are a little bit ahead in some subject areas or need a little bit of assistance, we're able to speed up or slow down based off of their needs. We have interconnected curriculum areas that really focus on those 4 C's. And our expectations are the same as our conventional elementary and middle schools. We have to abide by the Common Core state standards. We just teach it a little bit different. And I think that's really important for everybody to understand, because we have families that will come in and say, oh, well, do you do Common Core? Yes, we do. It just looks different. So it's really important for us to know that. Okay. And I just provided some of the pictures from our school. We do the Virtues Project, and every month we have a virtue that we focus on, and we talk about it as a school, talk about it every day in our community meetings. We talk about it with our families. It's in our newsletters. And then the hands that you see on the board, the children get to identify and recognize each other for the virtues that they are seeing. And then we put them up, and as a whole school, we will decide on some type of thing that they want to do. In February, they really wanted to sled down the main hill of Horace Mann and have hot chocolate, and that is what we did. So every month they let me know what they'd like to do, and that is what we do. We do participate in Community Fest to get the word out about our school. You'll see in that top right-hand corner, this is a language lesson with some of our elementary 1 students. We have a peace concert and soup night, so when we're not in pandemic time, our children get to select what soup they want to make. And then they work together with a classroom guide to figure out what ingredients and how much they need, and they all bring in the things, and we chop and peel and pour and stir, and then we serve that to our families at night. So it's another one of those times that we get to bring our families in. Every year, except for this past year for pandemic, I take the children that are in 5th and 6th grade to New York City for Montessori Model United Nations. It gives them a chance to pretend to be delegates of certain countries, and they have that opportunity to really learn about another country and decide, how could we achieve world peace? What do we need to do? What do we need to work towards? So that is an example of something that we do that's outside of our school building. And the last picture on this slide was just a celebration of a large group of 6th graders that we had that left us at the end of last year. We're very proud of them. So we celebrate our 6th graders that stay through for the duration of our school. And on the next slide, just some pictures. So usually with Montessori, you hear a lot about Montessori with younger children education. But I wanted to show you some pictures of our elementary 2 students. We have large work, so we need large classrooms because we're in the floor a lot when we are learning. So you'll see the pictures of that. The middle picture is a group of our 5th graders that were researching some things on Egypt, and they wanted to take over the lesson table, so I moved where I was teaching so that they could have that space. We participate in Book Bowl each year, and we also practice, those typing skills and those things for practical life. So I wanted to share with you just briefly in our charter contract renewal for this year. There are 2 minor changes that we have. In Article 3, Section 3.1, Part 6, and it's on page 8 if you were looking at that, we did change the verbiage that was there just to reflect what we currently offer families, which is our kindergarten through 6th grade program. I'm still very passionate, our families are still very passionate about expanding down to 4K and up to 8th grade, but in our current space that we are in, kindergarten through 6th grade is what we have to offer. And Article 4, Section 4.7 on page 12, we also have added transportation. So we'd like to be able to offer all of our families in the district, if they want to attend our Montessori charter school, an opportunity to get transportation to the Horace Mann Middle School building. Okay.
We recently worked with the technology department to develop a short introductory video about EEA. And so in lieu of talking for a couple minutes, I would just like to direct you to that video. Hopefully you can see it, even though I know some of you are very close to it. You'll at least hear it. Okay, Cassie's not getting any sound on it. So you certainly can look that up. I know we can always provide the link out to the board. But just in short, we serve students in grades 6 through 12, a maximum of 80 students in a year, and we use an advisory model to do that. So our students essentially, we function physically more like an elementary setting where the students have their home-based room and their curriculum is extremely individualized for their needs. We do utilize APEX, which is a computer-based curriculum, and that allows us to differentiate for the students in the 7 grades that we serve. And I'm kind of getting a little distracted by yes, we have some smaller class sizes. That video portion right there is me leading one of our Leader in Me Thursday morning lessons with one of the advisory classes. We focus heavily on restorative practices, and the general idea behind restorative practices is that we all have a picture in our mind of who we want to be. And when we mess up, and we will, because we're human, whatever happens should get us closer to that picture rather than farther away. So we utilize a lot of conversation and a lot of discussion when things go wrong, because when you're working with teenagers, things go wrong sometimes. So we just try to teach them how to have some of those more difficult conversations that, and help them learn that you can do that and you can get through that. Our curriculum piece, as I had indicated, is extremely individualized, right down to, by utilizing the computer-based curriculum, we've continued to grow and take things a step further. And now where we're at with that curriculum is that each student, based on the subject area, has deadlines set for them within the class. And how long they get to complete each course is based on how far away from graduation they are and how many credits they need in that specific subject area to get there. We often get students, we might get high school students who are credit deficient in one subject area, but not in another. So in the credit area, they're fine, and giving them a semester is perfectly fine for them to complete that class. But if they're behind in credits, they need to pick up that pace. In particular, if it's in English, because they need 4 credits of English to graduate. We follow the same credit requirements as East and West do, so our students have to acquire that same credit amount. And one of the unique things about the curriculum that we use is we use it in a mastery base. We require our students to achieve 80% on every assignment that they do before they're allowed to move on. Sometimes that means they have to redo things. Sometimes that means we might need to come up with an alternate learning plan. Whatever it is, they have to achieve 80%. So when they complete a course for credit, they literally have done every single assignment in that course at 80% or better. There are no missing assignments there, because if you're trying to avoid it for a while, it just sits there and waits for you. And then we push them back toward it, and they eventually have to do it. Some of our students have come to us by figuring out that sometimes if you leave things long enough, it becomes a 0 and you don't have to do it. And some of them relied a little too heavy on that at points in time. Our school really has the complete spectrum of students. We have students who just gravitate toward us because we're a smaller environment. Maybe they have some anxiety issues or some things like that going on. Sometimes some, just various difficulties. I know certainly the pandemic has brought to light many different issues in the mental health realm. But really, it's often just students who are looking for the right fit. And for some of them, the traditional setting just has not been the right fit. And that's totally okay. I was loving looking at Elizabeth's slides, because there's a couple Montessori students who have successfully transitioned to EEA, coming from Montessori last year, and are just really thriving on that whole individual pace of things. This slide highlights a few things, most of them pre-pandemic, so just know these are our goals to get back to. We partnered with the Boys and Girls Club, and our students took a trip to Washington, D.C. in the summer of 2019. We do an annual bike trip every year to Green Bay. So in the spring, our students bike the 90 miles with some volunteers to Green Bay. Not all of them. They don't have to do the bike trip. It's whoever wants to do the bike trip gets to do the bike trip. But that's always been just a wonderful tradition that we've had. We partnered with Rise Up, and our students designed the mural that is on the front of the WOW building, and then participated not only in the whole design process, but also we had some family paint nights and some things like that. We have an annual tea every spring where we bring women from the community and we get together and just celebrate all of the young ladies that we have, and typically our young men come and help serve at that tea. This year in the pandemic, we realized that one of the things, often schools might have pizza parties or something like that. We were trying to find ways that we could really honor families and our students, and so for a while we did some at-home pizza parties. One of our teachers was the fortunate one that I think like 2 or 3 weeks in a row, every mom that he called, he ended up getting the mom, and he got tears on the end of the phone as soon as he said, hey, guess what? Like, we see you. We see what you're doing. We see how hard you're all working, and we're going to deliver pizza to you on Friday for lunch. So our families really responded well to that, and we're just very touched by that recognition. We go to Camp Tosomas once a year, and we typically have monthly family nights as well to bring all of our students and families together. Are there any questions? And our contact information is on here in case you would need to reach us with anything afterward as well.
I do one question, and it was answered for Montessori. For EEA, is there any contract language change from the prior contract?
All very minor, just very minor things. In one section, we had to clarify an equity section on there, but really we didn't have anything that was no major
substantive
changes.
In terms of the relationship with the school district or anything, nothing like that? Okay.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Somebody?
Oops, I'm sorry.
I was just going to thank you for being here, because a couple of those things that you had stated in this channel is, I think, what we're trying to do with all schools, the responsibility of learning, gradual release of responsibility to the student, and experiential learning. I mean, those are the types of things that we would like to be doing, and obviously at the elementary level it works very well, so I'm very glad that you're doing it. And then the IOP, I always called it, the individual learning plan that you're putting every student on. I think a lot of people don't realize that's what you're doing at EAA, and so having this presentation is appreciative. Okay.
Just a comment. By your very existence, right, these two schools are not mainstream, right? I mean, which means that there's fewer off-the-shelf solutions, there's fewer off-the-shelf roadmaps in terms of where you guys are going. And what I find to me is probably most compelling is that when you drift from mainstream across that line to innovation and creativity, there's certain requirements that have to be met from a leadership standpoint, and those requirements only increase. So I just would like to say thank you to each of you for your leadership, for your dedication, for your passion for each of your respective schools. I truly believe that without you, they may not be here today, and we wouldn't be celebrating a lot of the successes that we see. So thank you both.
Thank you for your kind words. I know for myself, I certainly can't take those accolades without recognizing the amazing team that I have to work with at EEA. It is absolutely a team of people who want to be there and just come in every day and give it their all and just kind of roll with it, which is what we have to do some days when you have 80 very unique teenagers in the same space. So thank you, I appreciate that.
Then I would say the same thing. I have an amazing staff, and we just have wonderful families that give us feedback, and they help us to think outside of the box sometimes on some of the great things that we could do.
I did learn yesterday too, Ms. Chen, you may appreciate this. My sister informed me that my niece, who was fortunate to be in your school, was at home making a cheese quesadilla, and I stopped and I said, how does she know how to do? And I thought, well, maybe there's a cooking class I could enroll in because I can't cook. So it was
on
nice
over,
to
Mr.
hear that
McKay.
it was great to hear that my niece and she had gotten those skills from from your school. So it was a neat exchange. So
Thank you. So we
Okay.
would like to present the motion to the board to move the 5-year charter contracts for Wausau Area Montessori Charter School and Enrich Excel Achieve Learning Academy to the full board for approval at the next regular board meeting, so these two schools can continue to serve students in the Wausau School District.
okay, I will just offer a shortened version of that, seeking a motion to recommend to the full board the approval of the charter contracts. And that is including the 2 amendments that Ms. Channel had mentioned for the Montessori contract.
Second.
All right, first by Jane, second by Lance. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next on the agenda, Dr. Rauscher will present the Girls Lacrosse Cooperative Club Agreement.
This is something that we had previewed when we were talking about some of our WIAA co-ops earlier in the year, but I do want to make sure it's clear that this is a club request, not a WIAA athletic request. To give you a little bit of background, we do have a boys lacrosse club, so now we are seeking to formalize our girls program as a co-op and add that as a club. And one of the big advantages, besides offering extracurriculars and co-curriculars, is always good for kids, and we certainly want equity there. But I would say the other big benefit to this group of students is that by officially becoming a club, that allows Wausau East to be the host school, and then we can more easily arrange transportation for all the participants in the co-op. And then the club itself would still reimburse the district for those transportation costs, but it just makes things much easier. So just as Wausau West coordinates the boys co-op, we'd like Wausau East to be able to participate in and coordinate the girls lacrosse co-op.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Dr. Rauscher? All right. Hearing none, I seek a motion to move to recommend to the full board the approval of the Girls Lacrosse Cooperative Club Agreement as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All right, first by Jim, second by Jane. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Dr. Rauscher. And next, Dr. Hiltz will share an update on Project Relaunch.
Right, thank you, everybody. So tonight, we're going to address a few topics of interest that have emerged. And at the end, Mr. Boucher will talk a little, and others, will talk a little bit about some of the accelerated learning recovery plans that we have, so that we can update you on those. So first of all, going to the second slide, I just wanted to remind people of the situation of our secondary schools. The board did vote back in January to offer the greatest spacing possible, right, based on enrollment in a classroom. At this time, we still have approximately 25 to 30% of families who've chosen to remain virtual at that secondary level. One of the reasons that the board made the decision around at the secondary and not at the elementary was really around two things. The flexibility of the secondary schedule. In other words, if I'm in a chemistry class and I'm virtual, I could have the same teacher as those who are in person, so it was an easy change. And secondly, this was another step in our cautious reopening. So if you're wondering why we're changed at secondary, those are part of the reasons. Checked again the dashboard today, and there's still no significant increase in COVID transmission, although I see we have a couple of classrooms, middle school classrooms, I believe, that are quarantined. Questions about secondary schools before I go on to elementary? Okay, elementary then. So currently we are continuing to maintain that 6 feet of social distance in the elementary schools. We did, of course, separate virtual and in-person students at the beginning of the school year. And I'm going to go through a few complexities that introduces if we want to make some changes there. There is interest among some families whose students are currently virtual to returning to in-person, and that's part of the reason we're talking about this tonight. So yeah, next one. So currently, when we wanted all families who wanted their students to be in person to have that opportunity. And so in January, because we could not accomplish that at the elementary and maintain 6 feet of distance, we created 6 new classrooms at G.D. Jones. We hired 6 of our stupendous student teachers who were just finishing up, and we had space, and so we created those classrooms. We've also added one more at Thomas Jefferson Elementary for a total of 7, if I'm doing my math correctly. So currently we have about 100 students who are attending school in person, but not at their home schools. So that's one piece. Secondly, we do have currently, and I don't know if this has changed, I created this last week, 19 students who would like to move to in-person learning to their home schools, and they're on a waiting list. Okay. Next, there is still some uncertainty here. We don't know how many students actually would make that change if we allowed them to go to their home schools, and we don't know how many virtual students who aren't on a waiting list might choose to make some changes as well. So there's a little bit of uncertainty in there. One other important piece is we have a number of classes that are already near the board limit on class size. That's because they're in libraries, and so we're at 27 or 28 students, and it just happens to coincide that a number of the families who wish to return from virtual are also in those schools in those grade levels. So it adds a little bit of complexity. Next slide. Just a couple other areas, some staffing complexity. So obviously we've contracted with some teachers through the year, these expansion classrooms, if you will. You know, we would certainly keep those folks on. We would find some, but if those classes were to close, obviously we would still have those under contract. Secondly, one of the issues that we have as far as class size is, of course, we have 44 teachers who are currently virtual and really not available for in-person learning. So that adds some tension there. I think that's probably it as far as staffing. Lastly, I think it's a couple other things. Academic complexities. So for those of you who've been around a while, you know that at the elementary level, we try to keep our classrooms within grade level within about 2 weeks of each other to ease transitions that do happen between schools within the year. That wasn't able to be maintained this year for a wide variety of reasons. So as far as one academic complexity, if a child were to move from virtual to in-person, it's very likely that they would either be ahead in some areas or behind in some other areas. So just the student would be experiencing that. Next one, just a couple of other complexities, just communication. We've been, I think, very careful this year to communicate with families. If there were a decision made that would allow families to return from virtual to in-person, we would certainly want to give folks notice. When we did that at the secondary level, we did have some transition back from in-person to virtual. And I think lastly, when we talked about this several weeks ago, we didn't know if a big transition with 22 or 20, I think today we are about 22 days of school left. We didn't know if that was a change we wanted to make at this time. Let me pause there and see if people have questions or comments about elementary schools.
So we have 19 children that have been waiting to get into their school. The ones that chose to come back and were able to fit in were moved to some other schools potentially once the current home school that they went to filled up. So we have 19 kids that are waiting to get into a home school spread amongst 4 or 5 schools?
The majority are at Maine and Riverview, with a few others scattered across a few other schools.
So there's some components here. One is a distance where, you know, we've chosen as a board and as a district to allow a different set of rules at the secondary level than what's taking place at the elementary level, which is one of the components, which is keeping these 19 additional kids for the last 20-some days of school from getting into the school. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. I guess I know some, you know, some of these families have reached out and expressed that, you know, obviously there's some additional concerns other than curriculum, their social, emotional, and physical well-being that they're looking, and these children have been on a waiting list for some time. It's not like they've been, you know, just recently requested in person, correct? It was at the semester change?
I believe you're correct, yes.
They've been waiting since the semester change? Because the semester is when we allowed everyone to decide where they wanted to go, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure on the timing. Many of them have been on there for quite a while. I don't know the exact timing, though.
Okay.
Yeah, that would make a difference to me. If they elected to go virtual, and then later when we said this is it for the semester, and then later change their minds and want us now to do restaffing, it would impact my decision as to what steps I think we need to take to make that happen.
There we go. Just one more piece to that. If they have been on since semester, they were offered a spot at the new classrooms. So all kids were offered a spot somewhere in the district. These 19 kids and these 19 families only wanted spots in their home schools. So I think that's important information to know as well.
Thank you.
So do we know, I know you said, Keith, the majority of them are at Maine and Riverview. Do we know, you know, because the other thing that would influence my decision, along with what Lance said, would be if it's 1 in a classroom, 2 in a classroom here, right? And yes, it may not be, you know, technically 6 feet. There may be some need for adjustment or what have you, but it's different unless, you know, if you have 8 of these 19 jumping into 1 classroom. Do you know the disbursement of them?
I did at one point. We do have, and I might look to Ms. Sheridan, she might have the most recent numbers. I believe the largest number in a single classroom, Andrea, is it 4 or 5? Am I correct?
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I believe some of our largest classes, and this, I don't know why it worked out this way, I think it's just statistics, but some of our largest classrooms, the 27 or 28 students, also have 4 or 5 that want to go into that grade level in that same school. So that's some of our complexity as well. That led to our original recommendation just to maintain status quo.
Okay.
And I think we also have to remember, if we decide that we're going to let these kids come into these classrooms and shrink the distance between kids, then we have to contact all the parents in that room so they can decide if they want their child to remain in that room or to go virtual.
Right, yeah, it's one of those communication pieces. And hopefully, you know, those folks are you know, watching tonight, and so they know the conversation is happening. And but yes, you are correct.
What from an educational, I think in-person education is probably best for most kids, but from an educational standpoint, what is the impact in switching from a different teacher to a new class that's maybe not on the same schedule you were at with only 20 days to go? I have to imagine there's an educational transition period there.
Absolutely. You know, so you can imagine that if I have not learned some things, you know, and I'm, you know, 5 to 10 years old, and I come into a new classroom with a new teacher, there will be some transition that has to happen. There might be some, you know, some catch up they have to do. They might be ahead on some things. I think when I've spoken to the parents of the children on the list, I think they're most interested in the socialization aspect and are really willing to kind of, forego the academic. So it's a complex situation. We certainly understand that.
Well, if there's an opportunity to call a motion, I guess I'd like to, I'd like to call a motion to move our current distancing guidelines at the elementary level to align with the same distancing guidelines that are currently being practiced at the secondary level.
Can I clarify before we get a second? So let's just say, for instance, if we did that and these 120 students wanted to go back to their home schools, I don't know the distribution. We certainly have it recorded, but I don't have it in front of me, the distribution of which schools, which classes that would impact. I don't know I couldn't predict right now what those class sizes would be. Would that weigh into your decision?
I think I'm in alignment with you in that, those students that have already been moved and are currently in the place that, schools that they're in would remain there and ride the rest of this year out. We're talking about a small number of kids, 19 children. If the list were much larger, obviously that's a larger logistical situation, being that it's 19 students at, a number of schools. And again, I guess I have a second motion that would kind of go on top of this first one, which would put the authority and ownership at the elementary level with the principal and teachers to determine if in fact they do want to allow those 19 children, to enter their school. So yes, I'm in agreement that I know we have 20 days of school, but again, there's a handful of students that want to get back into school and again, that social, physical, emotional well-being aspect. So,
Mr. President, if I may, point of order.
Yes.
For really moving on into a discussion, we need a second, because if the motion is on the floor or on the table and it hasn't been seconded, it will go away. So I would
Thank
say
you.
that we need a second before we go further with the discussion.
So we had second by Mr. Nikolai.
Thank you.
So now we have a conversation.
Right. Could I make a suggestion? What I'm hearing that you want is for the students who are on the waiting list to be able to have the opportunity to go back to their home schools in person. So I'm just wondering if you want to make that motion and then obviously a second to that, as opposed to the whole distance piece.
Okay.
Because I think that would clarify for
And
folks.
the trouble is it's hard to craft an emotion because, for example, I would support reducing the distancing in a particular situation that district administration believes that was the only thing holding them back.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't support just saying, yeah, all 19 get to go back whether you guys think they should or not, because there's so many other considerations. Class size, what's it going to do to the virtual, what's the pace of that student versus the class, and just there's a lot more into it. If we were just giving discretion to go below 6 feet, if you think that's the only thing holding you back for those students, I would be supportive of that. Once you get beyond that, you're talking about operational stuff between district administration, principals, teachers. You guys got to figure that stuff out.
Right.
And I would point out too that in the March 19th, 2021 CDC guidance, they did state that in elementary schools, CDC recommends all students remain at least 3 feet apart in classrooms where mask use is universal, regardless of whether community transmission is low, moderate, substantial, or high.
So like if your motion is just to remove allow them to go to 3 feet, that I support. That doesn't necessarily mean that all 19 of these students definitely get whatever they've requested. That still would be up to you. Is that what you mean?
if that's what takes the ability for, again, the principal at that school to make the appropriate decision, I want that to rest, with them. And so, yes, that 3 feet distance. And obviously there's, some misalignment in terms of distance being allowed at the secondary level and at the elementary level, which, doesn't, make a lot of sense.
Because even pre-pandemic, we have times where students the families don't get to have the student in the school they want. I mean, and it's not up to the principal or the teacher to decide on their own. It's oftentimes it's district level, and oftentimes it's Angie deciding, those broader issues. And that's not a pandemic issue. It's heightened with the pandemic, of course, but it happens.
Can I ask for a point of clarification as the enrollment coordinator? So these 100 to 120 kids that have been placed at Jones and Jefferson and all over in the district where we found spots, we're leaving them there, even if they say, I would like to now go back to my home school because other kids are getting back into their home school with less than 3 feet of distance. I think we need that clarified tonight, because that's going to be the first question I get at 7:30 tomorrow morning on the phone.
Is that a question for me, or?
It's
okay.
For the
I
board.
would,
No, it's for the board in
okay.
general.
I would say yes. I mean, I would think that most parents that have those children move there, they've gotten into a rhythm and a groove, and there'd be no point in shaking that up. Let's just get through the last few days of school here, since there's a handful of kids. That's and again, wanting to put that decision-making power and the ability of those schools that have those kids waiting to just kind of allow those last remaining few kids to get into school. But I would not want to.
Yeah, could I ask that the board then maybe put something out that says that? I think that's going to be very difficult for parents to understand and swallow if they've wanted their child in their home school the entire time.
Well, the motion that was seconded was just to move the 6 feet to 3 feet. It doesn't go beyond that and say what you then must do. You must say yes to this child or or that. That would still be up to you to decide, like you do every single year, on where the children are placed. Because you may have one class where there's five kids trying to get in one class that's already got 28 kids. Well, I'm sorry, we can't.
And I imagine there can be a scenario where one of these 19 could be offered an in-person spot at one of the classrooms in Jones.
They have all been offered spots at Jones.
Okay, so they just have chosen not to take
Yes.
the Jones
Yeah.
issue. It truly is going to their home school.
Correct. That's why I wanted to define that, because there's so many layers to enrollment this year.
Well, and there's the equity of having one teacher teach 28 kids and one teacher all of a sudden now is only teaching 6 kids because all the kids left the classroom, and so there's so much involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so John, can you clarify the motion, please?
I guess I would pare it down to approving, a 3-foot distance in the elementary level.
Okay.
So that's the motion. We're not going to amend it or anything. So.
Well, and that is what you said originally.
Yep.
And we've just discussed.
Okay.
What does that necessarily mean? But that was the original motion, the first one that you made anyway.
Okay, so the motion then is to approve a 3-foot social distance requirement at elementary level. That's the first. So we need a second, or just to clarify, Jim, are you comfortable? Or who? Cody seconded it.
Yes, I'm
Okay.
comfortable with that.
So we have a first and a second on approving 3-foot distance at the elementary level.
So to clarify, so it's to decrease from 6 to 3 so that these 19 can go to their home schools.
Well,
That is not part of this. This is just allowing administration to take a 3-foot distance into consideration when they're looking at these 19 or these 100 in total, but to provide them a little bit more flexibility. I haven't heard anything that says that any of this would change, but it just gives them another piece of data, I guess, to use that would, or removing one potential barrier. I don't know that anything would even change, but that's up for them to decide.
Okay, thank you.
Just so, for example, if you have that class of 28 and there's 4 more kids trying to get in there, the 3-foot or 6-foot distance isn't the only barrier.
Correct.
And I'm fine with that. I've read the same thing from the CDC, so if the science is cool with it, so am I.
Then it comes down to an administrative and an educational decision as to what you think is best for each individual classroom, and staffing and everything else. I think we would just be removing one barrier. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to do A, B, or C. It's just one of your barriers has been removed.
Mind if I just verbally process this for a minute? Maybe just,
Yeah, sure.
So we've got our 19 on the list, we've got 100 at Jones, and we've got whatever other number that are virtual. I'm just thinking out loud, and Angie, if you don't mind, or Andrea, if you could help me, if we do this, and let's just say, worst case scenario, every child wants to go back to their home school. Now, the principals or Angie are going to have that conversation and assess every individual situation in each classroom.
When you say every, are you referring to the students that are currently at Jones?
Yes, or any student that's virtual.
So I would tell you what I would do. But it wouldn't be my decision. It would be what I would do if it was me, is I would probably say, you already have an in-person teacher, you're already in an in-person class, and with only 20 days to go, I wouldn't switch it. Whereas there might be a different student who's virtual, who's struggling, who just needs to be with some students, has the opportunity to move into a class where it's not over it's not over our caps or anything, where you might think that transition is okay. But you're right, what if we only know of 19 right now? What if, how many other hundreds of students are there suddenly also request to come back?
And that's why I think the key here too is with the 21 days left. I mean, after this analysis happens and you guys make the decisions, there may not be any action taken. I'm not suggesting that there should or shouldn't be. I'm just saying, given the time frame.
Gotcha. If I might, I don't know, Angie or Andrea, you're much closer to this than I am. Is there anything else you would want the board to understand as they consider this?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so we have a first and a second, and again, the motion is simply...
Jane, do you have...
I just wanted to say
I'm
something.
sorry.
How long would it take to notify all the families to get their input if we bring all the kids back? How many of you want to go virtual? Plus, the bus schedule would have to be totally reworked.
No, yeah, the bus schedule does not have to be altered, I don't believe. I think that's in place. Food service is not an issue at this point. I think we're all good. It's really the notification of the families. And what I think, as I'm thinking about that, I would, we'd send an email out to explain, the board is considering this. A final decision will be made on May 10, I think it is, May 11, and see if we can assess what the interest would be.
And I just think if we're comfortable with the science of 3 feet, then we shouldn't have that barrier there artificially. There may be all kinds of other reasons to keep things the status quo. That is an operational decision that I think you all should decide.
I think that's the biggest point right there, is that we're not micromanaging your decision. This is giving you the opportunity as administrators at the elementary school and at central office to make those decisions. You're on top of it. We're not. That's why you get paid for what you get to do.
Correct. So I'm going to ask for a vote on the motion to approve 3-foot social distancing guidelines at the elementary level.
Yeah, to recommend to the full board.
To recommend to the full board the approval of 3-foot social distancing guidelines at the elementary level. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
Motion carries.
Continuing on then, another topic that has come up. They've asked, will we continue to have masks for the rest at our schools and at our functions? Obviously, we had a little conversation about that last week. So just a few notes on this slide. Obviously, there's still a strong recommendation or a requirement from public health organizations. We did get a little interesting, I don't know, call it a modification from the WIAA. Do you want to share that, Dr. Rauscher, just as a point of interest?
Sure, and this is speaking just strictly through WIAA and then the impact it would have on us in relation to the Wisconsin Valley Athletic Conference. So WIAA has gone from, this is for spring sports this year, from the masking requirement to masking recommendations. So that opened the door for conversation at the conference level. So the Valley Conference activities directors met this afternoon, and thank you to our ADs for getting me the quick update. I will do the best I can to get this accurate for you. Basically, the Wisconsin Valley Conference is still recommending, or is now recommending that we follow the WA guidelines to go with recommendations, not requirements, with a few exceptions. So what would it actually mean? First of all, think about spring sports. Spring sports happen outside, at least the competitions. You might be thinking, don't we have indoor track? Not this year. So when you think about this, we're talking about sports always happening outside, which means anybody coming to watch the competitions would also be outside. So what would happen is we would ask that our athletes, and we being the whole Valley Conference, not just Wausau, but ask that our athletes wear their masks up to warm-ups and the competition. So if you think about something like soccer, if I'm on the sidelines sitting next to my teammates, I'd have my mask on. When it's my turn to go in the game, I would have the option to remove my mask while I'm playing. If you think about it in a baseball or softball scenario, I might have my mask on, or I would have my mask on if I'm in the dugout, but again, when I'm on the field, I would have the option to remove my mask. So again, thinking about spring sports, baseball, softball, pretty good amount of distance, usually, other than for just brief moments. Track gets a little closer, but again, even across a race, kids tend to spread out. Probably where you would have the most contact would be in something like soccer, but for pretty short time. So if you think about the 15-minute guideline that's been fairly consistent from the CDC, most of the contact would be under that in a fast-paced soccer game. So that's kind of what we're looking at for our students. We would still ask that our coaches wear their masks, and as far as softball and baseball, there would be an expectation that the official who was right behind home plate, that umpire, would also be masked. Again, if you envision yourself there, that umpire is very close to the other players. So that's what we're anticipating. It aligns actually very well with our current board policy, because we do allow for people to be without masks if they're outside and can maintain the 6 foot of distance. So the one real shift compared to our policy that we may have to consider if we want to align completely with the conference would be to allow the athletes to be unmasked while they're in competition.
There's no action being requested tonight regarding that. Okay.
Correct, yes.
May I ask about officials? Since I just went through a winter season officiating basketball, you're talking about umpires. One's out in the field around second base, moves around. First of all, he starts by first, and then person gets on base, he moves out to second. He's not in close proximity to anybody there. The umpire behind the plate has a hard time with the mask, and the mask, when he has to rip that off, he's going to have more problems with his mask that you're asking him to wear. I'm just kind of throwing out the situation with umpires, how that is. How are you going to expect that person to do that? I'm just giving you, and the WIA should be thinking about this more than what we should be thinking about this, and they should be making that decision instead of just simply passing the buck on to all of us.
I am more than happy to let the WIA figure out their umpire mask requirements. So it's a good question. I don't know how they're going to do it, but they'll figure it out, I'm sure. I'm
not an umpire, so I don't know. I'm just putting that out.
No, you're running up and down the court.
So tonight, we really just wanted to have that conversation. We would like to maintain the mask requirement in the schools for the rest of the year. We're clearly interested in depending on the status of the pandemic next fall, making those optional. But we would like to just kind of let people know where we're at for the rest of the year.
If the WIA, or if the Valley, I should say, makes that change, are you going to need something from us to respond to that?
What we would likely do is at the next meeting, bring a recommended motion just to allow the students to be unmasked while they're actively competing or in warm-ups. Because that's the only piece that doesn't align with our current district policy on masking.
And the only reason you're not doing that tonight is because you don't know yet for sure that WIA has actually done that. That's just what you think is going to happen.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, this just came up this afternoon, and I just wanted to give you at least time to think about it and keep listening so that if we do bring a recommended motion at the next meeting, you feel prepared and that you have the information you need.
Okay.
If I may just ask about that, I was going to ask the administration to begin with to get some data together for us, because I don't want us to be in the same situation that we've been in with central Wisconsin and the other districts, because the other districts are all over the place, from optional masks to no masks to mandated masks. You know, can you get some data that can prove to us, you know, for every article that comes out over here from one group, you get 3 or 4 from this group, and then this group comes up with 1 and they get 3 or 4 from this one. Can you put something together for us so that we can make a judgment that's accurate, whether we go masks, no mask, or optional?
And I think that's what the conference is attempting to do as a group. That's why they had their conversation today, because they'd like to have a uniform approach across the conference rather than have, well, this is sort of what our conference does, but Wausau's policy is a little bit different, and Merrill's policy is a little bit different, or Everest might have this tweak. They're trying to come to consensus as a group. So that's what we would bring to you, is not just what we think we should do, but this is what the conference would like to do. Can we adapt to be aligned with our conference partners?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Well, I'll just add that, look at some of the traveling sports that are already taking place in this community. My daughter plays traveling soccer. They're already there. Many of the traveling sports have already addressed this and are allowing their players to play, without a mask on. So it's already taking place in this community.
And I think additional information will be necessary too in making that decision on if masks should be optional or not for schools, is other districts in the community are not wearing or making masks as an optional, not something that's required for the students, and that's something that I would like to see that we look at the next board meeting. So I'd like to be able to have that information available, especially when you look at the data and the science that says that there's really not a big transmission or any big community spread or events amongst kids. And I think that, the continued masks can be more detrimental than helpful.
Thank you.
I don't know where you get your science from, but that's not true.
Probably because I went to med school.
Yeah, and you don't wear a mask properly, so.
All right, we're not in a debate here about whose science is better than who. There was a request for some information for the next meeting, and that's what we're going to act on.
I just wanted to point out, I sent out to all the board members today, article from Mayo Clinic about debunking the mask myths. There's not always 2 sides to a story.
As there usually is, so thank you for sending that out today. All right, what's left on this?
Last thing, we just wanted to share with the board some of the plans around the accelerated learning recovery. There's one last slide here. There's things that are already in place, some pieces that are happening this summer and for next fall. So I wonder, Jennifer, Andrea, who'd like to speak to this, please?
I'm happy to speak on behalf of the ed team, and I also trust that my colleagues will step up if there's something I miss or misinterpret. So. Looking at, first of all, we're looking at accelerated learning because we are not approaching this with a deficit mindset. It's easy to fall into the idea that things are wrong or broken. And so instead of that, we're going to say, yes, learning has been different this year. And so everything we're trying to do going forward is to help students accelerate their learning, help students make up learning that to this point maybe has been unfinished. And as we do these plans, we're really looking at students in a couple different ways. One, there's a concept of universal design, the idea that there are things that all students need, hopefully here coming out of a pandemic. And I'm not sure, I think, Jim, you brought it up earlier saying, well, what's going on with our students who maybe are AP or IB students who've also been impacted? I would agree with you. All of our students have felt an impact from this last year, a little over a year. So one of our pieces of approach to accelerated learning is looking at what can we do for all students. Then we have another group of students, and this is students who were struggling for some reason, struggling academically or in some way before the pandemic. And the research that's starting to come out is showing that students who struggled before the pandemic has intensified those. So we're also looking at how do we accelerate learning for those kids who struggled before and have continued to struggle throughout. So kind of keep those groups in mind as we go through. And then we wanted to break this down into what are we doing right now? What have we been doing since we last presented data to you on our kids' achievement? What do we have planned for the summer? And you've heard some of those pieces already tonight. And then what are some of the things that we're working on and planning in the fall? So pretty general overview on the slide. And I just want to tell a couple stories, give you a little bit of data to give you a sense of what's happening. But do know that we won't have the formal academic data until the semester ends in June, and then we have time to analyze it. So you wouldn't see a report like you'd seen, say, in January after the end of the first semester. We wouldn't have that kind of data until deep into June, potentially July. So just a little context there. One of the other pieces I guess I would share as an overall is something that runs through all of this. It's listed specifically in summer as professional learning, but we are all, administrators, teachers, support staff, the whole team, doing as much as we can to learn, because we know that when we learn, our students learn. So that's a thread that runs all the way through all of our work. You'll see that at the district level. You'll also see that within building teams as you talk to all of us. So some stories from right now. Overall, I would say K-12, we've been continually adapting, looking at our pacing, prioritizing essential learnings. Sometimes it gets talked about what are the need to know versus nice to know, trying to make sure everybody really has a deep understanding of the need to knows, and then adding supports right within our typical classroom experiences. And that applies for whether a student is learning from home or learning with us in schools at this point. One of the middle school examples of additional support, and this is data that Dr. Phelps, who was here before from Horace Mann, was able to share with me. Certainly, you know, we've been encouraging students to come in and work with us on our asynchronous Fridays, especially students who've been struggling. So they have a little bit of data going back to mid-February. Students who have attended at least 3 Fridays, and that's not necessarily a full day, but at least 3 different times have come in to work with adults at school on a Friday. 50% of the students who have done those 3 or more Fridays are now passing all of their classes. An additional 33% have improved their grades from wherever they were before. So that's 83% of our students who are on track and growing compared to where they were in February. So that's a great success story. To give you a high school example, one of the things that both of our high schools are working on is what we've just called night school. It's not necessarily at night, but it's extending the school day, so it's outside the typical school day. And it looks a little bit different at East versus West because the staff and the principals have worked to really tailor the programs to the kids and the families that they serve. But again, just a little bit of data from Wausau East. We've had 20 students who were struggling, maybe had not completed learning, maybe didn't earn all their credits for semester, who have now completed that learning and gone back and earned first semester credit. In a typical year, that would be 20 students who are waiting for summer school to start to have a shot at that. We already have 20 who've met that and are moving on. And we have other students who are in process. When Dr. Young was here talking about EEA, she mentioned APEX. It's a personalized online curriculum, and it's the primary curriculum at APEX, but we also have the ability to use it at our other high schools for students to go back and show their competence or show their proficiency in other ways. And so we have an APEX resource center that's operated at Wausau East this semester. 10 students there have completed 14 courses and earned 7 credits. Just to give you context, 6 credits is a pretty typical high school full year. So to have that number of students earning that number of credits is really a great success. And again, the teachers who are involved in that, and tell them we have more students who are close and who are in progress. So just a couple of the good stories about what's happening right now. I think the overall message there is before I've stood before you and talked to you about some of our students, we lost that connection. They disengaged, they lost, that connection to us. When we're able to re-engage with those students and regain that connection, the students have great success. So, go ahead, Jim.
Worked with Apex quite a bit. Whoa. I worked with, are we off here? Just about blew my ears off here. I'm sorry about that. Apex is a great program, and I don't know if all the board members understand that, you know, you're talking about condensing 6 credits in a regular year, but what that really does is they're passing the standards that they were not passing earlier with Apex. So you're going after the standards that they had not shown proficiency in, correct?
Correct.
You know, and so that's how the interventions are working. Am I correct in that?
Mm-hmm.
I just want to make sure that everybody knows that we're not handing out diplomas. We're not handing out or changing credits, correct, for graduation. We're not doing that. That was a big fear of a lot of people, I think, that now we're just going to hand out the parchment at the end. These kids are still, and they're working hard to get to that point.
Correct.
Okay.
And Apex is just, it's one of those tools where students can show proficiency. We've also had some teachers, I think some of our high school math classes are an example. Math tends to be a year-long class. So some of the teachers who have the students all year, if their students didn't do well first semester, they're finding ways to alter and adapt the curriculum for second semester so that they keep moving forward in their learning, but they're also going back and grabbing some of the pieces that were missed. And that's really important in something like mathematics, which is sequential. The official research term right now is called just-in-time intervention. So instead of saying, oh my gosh, you're not doing a good job, deficit model, you have some gaps, please stop that new learning, come over here until I catch you up, and then maybe I'll let you restart new things. That's not the plan. It's saying, we're gonna keep you moving forward, we believe you can do this, we're gonna offer you the supports, and if we notice that you have a hole in your learning, if there's something that's unfinished, we're gonna help you fill it right now where it's relevant to you and keep you moving ahead. So I get kind of excited because this is really exciting work. And it's something I think surprised some students that there are opportunities for them to accelerate their learning right now. Mm-hmm. They don't have to wait to try to make it up in summer school. They don't have to retake a class next year. We're trying to open doors for them now. And some of them might still need summer school, so we will continue to have that, and that's okay. We will do those things. Other summer projects, we will have our teachers doing some summer curriculum work and doing some professional learning. And what we're hopeful for and working towards as a district team, and teachers I've talked to have been excited about this, is to use some of, for example, the Esser funds to make sure that that is paid work. We know our teachers spend a lot of time in the summer on a typical year, working with their colleagues, reworking curriculum and adapting. Well, there'll be a greater need for that this summer and probably the next few summers, and so we want to bring back paid summer curriculum work and potentially paid professional learning if we can get it all to fit neatly in the budget reconciliation plan.
Okay.
And then next fall, lots of different things going on. Obviously, we stick with making sure we have a good guaranteed and viable curriculum. That's K-12. We really are trying to focus on best practice instruction, strategies that teachers and students can use together that work regardless of content that you're trying to learn. So just really, what does quality instruction look like? And then we're creating some new pathways and new opportunities, as well as adding staff. Again, to go back to the budget reconciliation, you saw accelerated learning recovery is in there. We're dedicating staff and resources to help these students find these different pathways. One of the ones that I think is called out specifically is called the GITO 2 program. It's a state program that we are going to apply for, and you will hear more about it because it is a different pathway to graduation. And it goes back to that idea of competency. Mm-hmm. So I can certainly show my competency by earning traditional credits, but I also might be able to show my competency through a work-based experience or through taking a GED test. So we'll be able to create, I think you called it an ILP, Jim. In my previous district, we talked about IGPs, individualized graduation plans, and take a student who is feeling like he or she has really maybe dug a hole and traditional credit attainment doesn't seem possible. And we'll say to that student, well, guess what? Here's another way you can show us what you understand about math. Here's another way you can show us what you understand about English. And that student, through a combination of credits earned, testing, work experience, or volunteer experience, and some kind of career planning, can still earn a diploma from their home school. And a really great piece of this Guido 2 idea is that East, West, and EEA are partnering, and that'll allow us to do it much more efficiently from a financial standpoint, but be able to serve students all across the district.
I like that.
Those are just a couple of the things that we're really excited about, and we will continue to update you as we learn and make more progress.
Can I ask a question, Dr. Rauscher?
Sure.
Thank you, first of all, for sharing those success stories. I mean, I think that's exciting to hear, and I just really appreciate the efforts that the teachers have been giving to think outside the box and obviously get these interventions going. I just had a question with regard to, have you received requests, I would imagine they'd be limited, but any requests for students to repeat the year that maybe they've really failed in? And what is the response with, I mean, not that we want to open that up on a large basis, but I would imagine if there are some students, at least that I've learned about, that would prefer that, and families that would prefer that option, without giving them that option, we potentially set them up for increased failure in the year that they then, get advanced to, and also an increased burden potentially on those classroom teachers who have to meet this really huge gap between some students and others in their classroom. So I'm just wondering, for that limited maybe number of students and families who would request that, what is the response, or is that being made available to them?
I haven't received any of those requests yet. Doesn't mean that they are not out there. I guess what I would recommend would be, honestly, in this case, for parents and families not to start with me, but to start with their counselors and their principals at their home school to really make sure they have a good idea of where they are. And I can tell you from some of the research that we're starting to look at is really not very different than research we've seen before, and it argues against retention. So the key, though, then is what do you do, as you said, to kind of close that gap? So there's the right now or the just-in-time type intervention that's built in. There's also, and again, this is early, but looking at, there's a real potential through intensive tutoring that can be built into the student's day or extended beyond their day. And so one of the other examples to go back to the budget workshop, this was not, or the reconciliation plan, this was not an Esser piece, but the Boys and Girls Club collaborative partnership. That would be something that could put an adult sort of mentor / tutor in place with students at the middle school, but then if those students would go on to the Boys and Girls Club, we would share that staff member with the Boys and Girls Club. So as the students move from school to the Boys and Girls Club in the afternoon, the staff member would travel with them. And so you'd have that extended service. So those are all the kinds of things that we're exploring. I certainly wouldn't want to just say now, like, no, we'll say no to every, to anybody, but I would encourage that conversation with counselor and principal first, and then we'll figure out what we can offer.
All right, Keith, you had one?
That's all I had tonight.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on. School Force Capital Improvement Update. Mr. Tess?
Mr. President, with your blessing, I'd like to go back to the budget reconciliation agenda item to correct an error. And I've got a slide up here on the screen, and there was a math error that I kind of caught while I was looking at it, but I couldn't correct it quick enough. I don't have my laser pointer right now, but that's $741,000 deficit. That's actually a $48,000 deficit. And the culprit is that last red line. That last red line got added later, and the math didn't keep up, and when you have a running total, it kind of repeats itself. So I don't think it changed anybody's vote. This is a much better budget reconciliation plan than we had an hour ago. My apologies for even submitting this. It's kind of embarrassing, to be quite honest with you, but there was a lot of things going on last week, and this changed right up until I submitted it. So this is a much better plan. The next slide, since that 741 is repeated over and over again, the new $48,000 is repeated over and over again as well. So if you voted for this one, I don't know if we could make it 10-0 if we changed it, but we probably could, because I don't think anybody would change their mind. But I'll have an updated one in board book probably tomorrow morning, bright and early. Will you help me do that, Cassie? Okay, I just changed it in the shared document. So now,
And then come back with another.
Yeah, make it better and better.
Yeah, if you got to do laps or whatever,
I'm
that's,
so glad
yeah.
I didn't have back-to-back, so I got a chance to.
Thank you for that clarification. That
You
is
don't
good
actually
news.
vote on it for, a month, so you have time to make it really good by next next month.
Well, the state budget gets to be an improved state budget. That everything hinges there. So let's all lobby and do our best. So with that, how about if we talk a little bit about the school learning, the School Forest Environmental Learning Center. There was a request 2 weeks ago to bring you some information in light of the failed referendum and our inability to fund a new environmental learning center. What's the status of the school forest and the Red Lodge in particular? And you'll see on the left side are a bunch of funding sources that have been kind of protected for school forest capital improvements. The first one, $84,000, I have to give a shout out to the school foundation. The Wausau School Foundation has been very generous in regards to the school forest. And they came up with $84,000 in private funding, and you'll see on the right, the top one was used to improve electrical service and bury the electrical service so every time the wind blows, it doesn't knock out the power at the school forest. So that was completely funded by the Wausau School Foundation. The other ones on the left are called assigned fund balance. When we have fund balance, we can assign it or protect it for certain reasons. And the source of each one of those revenues are listed. We sold timber that was standing at the school forest, $144,000. We did sell A.C. Kiefer after our 2015 referendum. We sold some land that was across the river from the school forest that we hardly ever visited. And we sold that for $259,000. We did sell a home a couple of blocks from here, right out across from the tennis court. And when we made each of these transactions, the board told me to put that in a protected area for school forest capital improvements. So that was $834,000 protected for just that reason. And then gradually, we spend some of that money, and the expenses are on the right, besides the one I already mentioned. You approved, I believe it was about $20,000 to pursue some of the planning for an environmental learning center. Before we even really talked about a referendum, we only spent $6,400 of that. The very next one was about 13 months ago. It was right at the beginning of the pandemic. We bought 40 acres to expand our school forest. And it really rounded out our school forest real estate holdings nicely. You might remember from the map, there was like 40 acres that looked like we should have it too, right? And we used that money, $125,000 to buy 40 acres. And then earlier this year, we made some fiber and some data improvements that is still incomplete. That's why it's a nice round number. We're hoping to come in less than $400,000. And we used the designated money to make those improvements, okay? That leaves us with still about $219,000 in that designated fund. Next slide, please. Next steps in the Red Lodge in particular, which is our classroom at the school forest that we were proposing to replace with a brand new environmental learning center. But now with the failed referendum, where does that leave us? We're going to continue to work with the Wausau School Foundation to identify any projects of interest to them. Right now we're talking about one of them. It's a generator, an emergency backup source of energy. It's fueled by natural gas, and we're talking with the foundation right now about perhaps funding that expense. The supply itself, I think of the school forest as Years and years ago, you bought a cabin in the middle of the woods and you didn't know exactly what you were going to use it for. And eventually, you wanted to add on a garage and a shed and a red lodge and another building. And you linked it by running a gas line to the next one and running electricity to the next one. And then one day you decided you wanted to live there permanently. And there are elements of it that are inadequate. And that's happening at the school forest. So we have to bring some of those inadequate elements up to standards for having students out there regularly. Fixtures and furnishings, the foundation might be interested in that. If we do go ahead with an environmental learning center, the next big bullet, we're going to suspend any large-scale capital improvements to the Red Lodge. I think everybody in here would agree with that. We don't want to dump a bunch of money into the Red Lodge when it's seen better days, let's put it that way. We're going to work hard to ensure that that environmental learning center remains at least in the discussion if we do talk about a future referendum. When I was out in the community talking about the referendum, whenever we talked about the environmental learning center, we got a lot of head nods. People were pretty excited about the environmental learning center. So it's going to be our job to at least keep it part of the conversation. Continue to identify capital improvements at the school forest that wouldn't become stranded investments if we were to tear down the Red Lodge and replace it with an environmental learning center. There are still some capital improvements that we can make to the school forest. Replace deteriorating storage buildings with maybe a single, instead of 3 smaller buildings, a single decent storage facility. Replace aging roofs other than the Red Lodge siding with resilient materials that cut down our operational costs from year to year. If you ever got a chance to go across the creek down there, or the river it is, certain times a year, there's a series of bridges, and we're looking at replacing those, the bridge crossing the creek and partnering with the Wisconsin Corps to share labor costs and actual costs. So we're going to continue to look to do some things at the school forest that are kind of independent from that environmental learning center, so they wouldn't disrupt any plans. I think that's the last slide. Again, that was a request from 2 weeks ago, just an update where we're at with this environmental learning center and the school forest in particular. I know Larry Seiler's here. He can answer some questions for you. I can answer some questions for you. I don't know if Chris Nelson's in the crowd anywhere. He's here. He can answer some questions for you.
Bob, what's left? If what was earmarked in the referendum, if we were going to do everything that we wanted to do, given the investments that have been made, what is left to invest?
It was a little over $4 million for the new environmental learning center.
$4 million and change. Is that then, can we subtract off the $615 that's been spent? So that's all separate.
These are items outside of the environmental learning center. These items will support an environmental learning center in the future, but they weren't considered as part of that initial investment.
So you could subtract off the 200-something thousand we have left, but we have other needs out there that may be spent on, and you also, not how to say it, but.
Okay. Thank you.
Your point, keeping it on the forefront, because environmental learning centers, I think, is very important because it gives elementary, middle school, and even take high school kids out of the environmental classes to take them out there. I think a district that has something like that is always going to be on the cutting edge of environmental learning.
Agreed. I think ROI is very difficult to measure in schools. It really is. And oftentimes you measure it with how many students take advantage of any given investment. A lot of students take advantage of this investment. And not only students from the Wausau School District, students from all over central Wisconsin take advantage of this investment.
This isn't a referendum discussion, but I will say that if a lot of discussion has to happen yet in terms of what if we go, do another one and timing and all of that, but I will say that, the $4 million, and I agree with you because I heard it from a lot of people too. There was a lot of positive feedback about that. And if we're serious about this, and I think that every board member that has been up here for the last how many years has been serious about it, we need to think differently about not only this component, but the referendum in general. we need to have different viewpoints. We need to look at it outside in as well as inside out. This board needs to lead differently. There's a lot of things that have to come together, because decisions like this for a community of this size really should be a no-brainer. So somewhere we've got to disconnect in terms of getting support for things that seem to make all the sense in the world. So I look forward to those discussions and figuring out where we can take this. All right. Thank you. Okay, last item. School board workshop facilitator, Dr. Hiltz, has some information to share.
Yes, sir. So, Mr. McKee, you just said that the board needs to lead differently. I'm here just to...
My opinion.
That was one opinion, yeah. Actually, 3 new board members just came through a very tumultuous pandemic, still kind of in it. I'm asking tonight just for permission to schedule a closed session interview with this board and a consultant who, if you liked what you heard in the interview, we would co-develop a series of workshops just to talk about this working relationship and what's the role here in an organization that's it's a great organization striving for excellence, working in a continuous improvement format, and this person could help us navigate that a little bit. So I'm just looking for a kind of a thumbs up, if you will, if I could set up an interview. That's it for tonight. One, good, awesome. I'll take it, and I'll tell you more later. Thank you.
Easiest item of the night to which will become the most difficult item at some point. So. All right. With that, I am seeking a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Mr. President?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. President?
I'm sorry, what?
Before we vote, I would like to make a request for our May meeting. So my request is that at our May meeting, could we get the open records to who requested our last special meeting, please?
I'm sorry, I didn't follow that. You want the open record for who called?
Our last special meeting, sir.
I called the last special meeting.
I'm sorry?
I called the last special meeting.
Okay.
Anything else?
No, that's it.
Wonderful. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned. Thank you.